everyone. We're so excited to get this event started and for the great questions and just to have Dave here to be our office hours expert this month. I'm going to give a couple of minutes to get a couple more folks in to the room. In the meantime, if you want to go ahead and drop in your name, your organization, your role, and then something you're passionate about. It can be inside or outside of work. I feel like Lavon, who is my colleague who kind of coordinates a lot of this, she's on PTO today, and she's gonna laugh when I say pickleball is mine right now, and I just was talking to Dave about it, but feel free to drop whatever in the chat. We'd love to kind of get to know each other. It's a pretty small group where we hope to have an engaged conversation throughout as well. So feel free to drop that over in the chat. John, I love that you're obsessed with board software platforms. It's a very niche obsession. I'm here for it. So awesome. And I apologize. I'm going to ask Colin to see if she can do anything on the background. I would like to be able to bring folks to be able to ask real questions because this is an office hours moment, but I'm really starting to think that you might just be chatting with us, which is totally fine. Dave and I can have a conversation and hopefully you get something out of it, but I would love to be able to bring people in to ask a question. I'm not sure if the settings are allowing you to do that or not, but we'll get that figured out one way or the other. So I have a couple of slides to share just to get us kicked off. This is a new series that we started at Boardable about a month ago, and we did our first session with Christy Howard-Schultz, who's a friend of Boardable's, and it was great, and there were a lot of really good conversations. And so we have a new guest today, as you can see. Christy's not joining us again, so I'll introduce Dave here in just a second. Before we begin, a few housekeeping things. First is you'll receive a recording via email, so this will all be recorded. You'll get that via email. So if you're rapidly taking notes or anything like that, don't worry, you'll have this. You should get some exclusive bonus content. So Lavon and Holland on my team will be sending out some kind of things that usually we have gated or ebooks that we don't always just expose to everybody. We'll make sure you get that content. We are always having more events at boardable.com. Also, boardable.com is getting a makeover and overhaul. So in the next month, you'll see a brand new look and feel over there, which is exciting. And then share any of your questions, comments, or emojis in the chat. We'll work through chat for now. If we're able to bring you guys onto the stage, as they call it, on Livestorm, we'll do that as well. If not, we'll work off of some of the questions you've submitted and leverage the chat. So I'm really excited to introduce Dave Sternberg. So Dave and I just realized that we both are based in Indianapolis. So Indianapolis is home to a ton of philanthropy organizations as well as a ton of nonprofit tech related organizations, and a lot of that does stem out of Eli Lilly being based here and just kind of the Lilly endowment and a lot of those things. So I want to introduce Dave Sternberg. He's a founding partner of Laureen Sternberg and Associates, LSA, and has considerable experience in nonprofit board development and governance work. He's been a nonprofit professional since obtaining his degree from The Ohio State University. I always have to get the in there properly. He is a member of the faculty at the Lilly School of Philanthropy at Indiana University's fundraising school, a certified governance consultant, and a former senior governance consultant with BoardSource. Dave also authored the second edition of Fearless Fundraising for Nonprofit Boards, a publication for BoardSource, and conducts board retreats across the U.S. He's a frequent speaker for Make-A-Wish, the YMCA, CASA GAL, and a number of national organizations and funders. He is the board chair of Purple Heart Homes in Statesville, North Carolina as well. So some firsthand experience, which is always great. I've served on a few boards as well, and I feel like that always just brings this all to life. You understand kind of both sides of it, Dave. So I kind of covered all of it, everything that's on this slide, and wanted to kind of just start off with some common themes. So a lot of the themes from your questions came from board accountability. The CEO does the work, some role clarity, and just the overall like need for engagement of that board. So Dave, I'll kind of turn it over to you to get started with some of these, and then we'll manage chat over here as well.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. It's good to be with everybody today. And as Jenny said, like, use the chat, and you guys are on your end, Jenny, monitoring that. But before we started, the Boardable team sent me some questions, and I'm gonna start to work on off of those here in a second. But I think Jenny, what I like to tell people is my amazing accomplishment that usually I leave off, but I'm very proud of it, is that I was president of my 7th grade class both years. And I think that is a real helpful thing for people to know, that stick-to-itiveness on a subject, right? Okay.
I love it.
Yeah, so those kind of were the themes that came through in a handful of questions that came through. And I'm going to start with the questions. And again, I encourage everyone to put some comments in the chat as we go. But one of the questions that was shared was about holding board members accountable to their tasks. Who should be holding them accountable? And I like to use the 10 basic roles and responsibilities that is a board source tenet, if you will, and used it for decades. But it is the 10 roles of a nonprofit board. And it outlines each of those roles, and it makes it really pretty clear what the board is responsible for. So things from, safeguarding the mission, to fundraising, to planning, to, overseeing the finances, some general things. But it's one thing to know what the board's role is. And so, Jenny, you talked about, being on a couple boards yourself, and I'm a board chair. And it is super important that we know what the role is. And oftentimes when we talk about those roles, I think setting aside some time to let boards think through what they are, and maybe in small groups consider how they're performing those roles, and sort of reporting back and talking to the larger group. Because one of the things I find that's very common is, I'll ask, what are the tenets of a good team? Like, what makes a team good? And people will say, well, if you want to be a good team, you got to have camaraderie, you got to have some trust, you got to know what each other's going to do. But the one thing good teams do is they practice. And I don't think that in our sector we practice governance very well. I think we come to meetings, we are well-meaning, we do meetings, we do work at meetings, and then when the meeting's over, we just wait until the next meeting as a general rule. It's not practicing. So it is important to know those roles. The other thing is, with respect to who's holding them accountable, the board is accountable to itself. And so I strongly share with clients and recommend that boards have a governance committee, and that committee has some very specific duties. And I'm going to talk about a couple of them real quick, because that is the environment that we create that ensures that we're accountable to one another. I can tell you who the board is not accountable to, and that's the CEO. And one of the questions later in here commented on, the CEO's doing the work. How does the CEO get out of doing the work? Well, that's a culture issue within an organization, and that's a significant issue, because as long as the CEO is going to do the work, the board's not. I mean, it's just that easy. But the governance committee has some very important tasks. One is the board expectations that your board members follow needs to be developed by the governance committee, clearly approved by the board. But that committee will develop that board expectation statement, or whatever the internal term an organization wants to use. Board members need to decide what the role of the board's going to be, not the staff. The other thing they're going to do is look at recruitment. They're going to do hopefully an effective job of recruitment by using a matrix and determining what skill sets are needed. What do we need at what time in our history, so that we have the right skill sets presented. And that's a really mindful thing to do, because you don't need all skill sets all the time at every moment. And so when we're too similar, we're homogenous in skill sets sometimes. The other thing is that's important is creating an orientation process. And so what I find is when board members aren't performing it at high levels, there's usually connectivity to the fact they were never oriented, or they weren't oriented in a way that made it clear what the role was going to be and what was expected. So a lot of times governance committees will take ownership of that process. The other is an evaluation. And if I want to see $half size eyeballs, it's usually when I suggest to boards that they do an annual evaluation, not of the board, but each board member doing an evaluation of their own performance. I think it's crucial that they know how they're doing. And the other thing that governance committee will do is take a hold of those evaluations and review them and decide, is Jenny doing what she should be doing? And if she's not, how do we address that, right? Do you remove Jenny? Do you find her another role within the organization? Do you assist her at improving her performance? So one is, do we know the role? And two is, are we willing to create accountability around that? And as daunting as it seems to think about creating accountability, once you begin a culture where there's accountability, performance improves at the end of the day. Over time and time again, I see that performance improves when people are being held accountable. And so if you're an executive and you felt like it was your role, I'm encouraging you to understand it's not. I know the fact that I just said that may not make a difference tomorrow morning, but it is indeed not your role. So bear that in mind. And so
Dave, I'm going to
yeah,
interrupt you
please.
just for 1 second.
Yeah.
One of the things that you had mentioned is the board sort of needs to decide like what type of board they're going to be, or what they're
Mhm.
going to do. We deal I think all of us in sort of the nonprofit world deal with a lot of board transition, like in the sense of whether it's a newer nonprofit or whether it's just, some key board members have rolled off over the years, or that type of thing.
Mhm.
What does that exercise really look like? Because I feel like I've been on boards where it feels like there's kind of already a decision that has been made as to like what the role of this board is going to be, and how we're going to operate. And then other ones that it feels like everybody feels like a little too timid and doesn't like step on toes, and just finding that right balance. I'm kind of curious, like how boards can do that, and then maybe for the folks that are kind of in that CEO ED
Mhm.
role, how do they kind of step out of doing the work, right? Because I think
Yeah.
that's always hard, because it's like, well, if nobody's creating the agenda, I'm going to go ahead and create the
Right.
agenda, and I'm going to tell
Right.
the finance person, here's the budget, and
Right.
like
Right.
all of that. So I'm kind
Yeah.
of curious, those two things are just things I've seen in my experience, but also I think that we kind of are always working with our clients here at Boardable on kind of that board transition world, and this feels kind of attached to that too.
Yeah. I mean, some of that is setting up systems, Jenny, that will allow for boards to have continuous managed turnover, right? It's not 6 out of the 12 are leaving at once. So do we have term limits? Where do people fall within their class and those term limits, so that we're only losing a few people at a time and not a lot? Because you lose a lot of institutional memory when you do that, right? And so when I see that be a problem, sometimes an organization's new, and so everyone is new to the board anyway, right? Because the organization's young. But I have to tell you, the age of the organization does not mean that the board is any healthier or better functioning. Like, dysfunction belongs everywhere. Like, every board can be dysfunctional. The other thing is, look, we in the sector, our executives, um, they need to get things done. And many of them feel like, if it's not going to get done, I'm going to get it done. Right, Jenny? I'm like, you just said that. Like, if it's not going to get done, I have to get it done. I have said, and I realize this is easy for me to say. So just to be clear, as long as you do it, the board's going to let you do it. You need to just say no. Something just needs to not get done. And if the challenge is that the board believes that's the executive's role, that's different, a different challenge. Some education would be helpful for the board, right? An opportunity for everyone to be in the room where everyone's equal to talk through what those roles are. But if the culture is that the CEO does it because the CEO is the only one that feels like they're, that he or she can do it. Well, that's a different issue, right? So, and that gets into another wholly other topic, which you didn't ask about, Jenny, which is that constructive partnership, as we call it at Board Source, between the CEO and or the executive director and the board chair. So the board I chair, for example, I have a periodic call with our CEO, and sometimes those calls are business. There's a related sort of organizational matter, and sometimes they're not. But he knows that they're penalty-free conversations, right? He has my support, and he supports me. So I mean, you have to get to a point where that partnership is strong. And I often urge new board chairs to sit down with their CEO and create some kind of agreement of what we will expect from one another. And I know that sounds a little sort of cheesy, but it's really super helpful. So that's a culture problem, Jenny, that you brought up. It's a good question. And to your point, you would be surprised how frequently that happens, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those folks that maybe aren't as deep into this, for clarity on that role side of things, Dave, between the
Right.
board and sort of the staff and the CEO, are there like analogies or things that you like to use for folks to understand like those that role
Yeah.
clarity or anything
Yeah.
there?
Yeah. Here's what I like to say. I like to say that the board oversees the life of the organization, and the CEO or executive director oversees the daily operations. And so when we as board members start to seep into the daily operations, we've really overstepped that boundary. And yeah, there are certainly times where you could argue overstepping the boundary might make sense, right? There's an emergency, there's a CEO that's done something wrong, there's a major HR issue, fine. That ought to be few and far between. We as board members, we safeguard the life and legacy of the organization. It's all long term, it's all high level. It isn't about implementing programs. It isn't about managing the staff. When boards get into that, it's a bridge too far, quite honestly. And to your point, Jenny, and the other thing is what kind of organization. And I don't mean tax status. I mean, are we grassroots? Like, do we not have staff? Well, when there's no staff, sometimes boards involved in delivering the program, there's no staff. That's inevitable. We really can't get around that. But I think, again, they have to think about what is the trajectory to get to a point where we have a staff member, so we can then go into the governing role and growing the institution rather than managing and implementing the programs. So that's kind of how I define that boundary.
That makes a lot of sense. Folks, feel free to drop in any questions. I do feel like you can say participate and you should be able to
Yeah.
come live and we welcome you to do that. But if you want to stay in chat mode, that's totally fine as well. I know sometimes I
Yeah.
join a webinar and might be doing some email on the side, that type of thing. So feel free to do what makes sense for you. But I do want to just invite you to do that. With that role clarity, Dave,
Mhm.
I am curious. We're talking volunteers usually, right? Like
Right.
these are volunteer board members.
100%.
Do you think that, you know, sometimes like I think that sometimes folks sign up or try to, recruit their friends to the board and do all of that. And you talked some about expectation setting and understanding that you do actually have a pretty big role that's really important for the survival of the
Yeah.
nonprofit. I'm kind of curious how you can address
Yeah.
that and make that work, because I think a lot of boards that I've been on, you kind of get recruited by a friend, right? You're
Yeah.
like, oh, they care about this, I care about this, like this will be
Yeah.
a way for us both to serve together.
Right.
And then you're on it and you're suddenly like, oh, this is really work,
Yeah.
so I'm curious how to
Yeah.
manage that.
There's a great tool, and I share this tool at retreats 99.9% of the retreats I do. It's called the board building cycle. You can get it at Board Source. I probably have 3 copies sitting on my bookshelf over here. It's a workbook, and a colleague of mine actually has written the most recent edition of that. This is about, Jenny, having a recruitment strategy that's driven by what is needed on the board, not who Jenny's friend is. And so the way we talk about this is we say, here's the things we are looking for presently, right? That might be these kinds of occupations that lives in these parts of our state or our community, have other nonprofit board experience, other skill sets. I mean, you can create a recruitment profile, as I like to call it. Then I share that with the board. And Jenny, why I do that is because I want the board members to look at that and say, who in my network now, okay, who I know is important, but they need to meet some of the criteria, right? So it's no longer Jenny's friends. Jenny, I'm sure your friends are wonderful, but they may not meet the criteria we need. I mean, this is a dispassionate thing, right? Like, they didn't meet any of the 5 things that are critical to us right now. So we're not going to consider them. Maybe they'd make a great volunteer, but not a board member. And those are 2 different things. Volunteers and board members are not the same thing. So you're driving that by the recruitment process. Then those folks should be vetted, in a healthy way where they're exposed to the organization. They might attend a board meeting. They might see the programs, right? Come to the gala. I mean, how are we
Yeah,
introducing them
and
to the
really
organization?
like mutual vetting, right?
Right.
Like making sure you want to be a part of this like organization. And yeah, so
Right.
I feel like there's a
Yep.
mutual aspect there.
Yeah, and it goes both ways. We may find out the person's really not interested. Well, then, that's
Yeah.
great. Okay. And we may find out, all the moon and stars align. And when they are, and that's important because we're exposing them to the organization. I mean, I have clients, Jenny, that will offer the financial picture, the audit to prospective board members before they even ask them to join. Like, that is real transparency. And once they join, they should be oriented. And so that's where we then reinforce what the work is, right? Here's the job again. We want to make sure, I highly suggest boards share with the prospective board member when they're ready to ask them to join what the role, what the expectation is. Here's what we expect of everybody. Make sure you know what we're asking. You must make a gift. You must attend board meetings, right? What are all the things that you have to do? And because what you're going to do, Jenny, and I mean, this is what happens. You're going to be nice about it to your friend. You're going to tell them it's
Yeah.
easy and they don't have to. Well, they do,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's where when back to that governance committee where we get serious about the process and do it in an effective way, we can weed out some of those issues before they even start.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have a couple of great questions
Okay.
in the chat, Dave. And the first one is one that I have experienced as well, and maybe a little bit different. But Kathy had asked, "What do you do if an ED is trying to move the organization in a different vision than what was in the charter?" I've experienced this in a way that was a little bit more of like, do we diversify the services that the organization offers, or do we diversify the geographies that the organization offers too? I think that's a little bit, I don't want to say of a classic one, right? But whether it's a food bank or a
Hmm.
homelessness, or that kind
Right.
of, there always is a like, do we go broader or do we like go in more places and all of that? But Kathy, I'm not sure if yours compares in that way, but Dave, anything that you suggest there in regards to sticking with the charter? Like, at what point do you just say, well, we've changed, right, and we need to like change the charter, versus the board trying to keep the CEO on track there?
Yeah. So this is one of those that sort of depends, but there are a variety of responses, and I'm going to offer them to you. um, Number one, the board has a legal right, by the way, to change the mission of an organization. They have that legal right. Okay. It doesn't happen very often. I'm not encouraging anyone to go do that. I mean, that's different than wordsmithing the statement. I'm literally talking about, my favorite example is March of Dimes. Jenny, you're too young. You will not remember what the purpose of March of Dimes was, but it was to cure polio. Well, that was done. And now their mission is premature birth and birth defects. Like, they changed their mission. Okay. So the board has the right to do that. But more specifically to your question, um, if this is about mission creep, right? Like, we're still operating in the space, but we're doing things we haven't historically done. Listen, a board is the governing body. they are obligated to provide, they're obligated to ensure that there's adequate programs and services, right? Like, are we doing what we said we would do? Is this consistent with our strategic plan? If these things are not consistent with the strategic plan, then the board needs to address this issue directly with the CEO. And there's a variety of ways you can do that, right? I've seen examples where the board goes into executive session, discusses it, then goes talks to the CEO. Or listen, we're just going to have a meeting with, we're going to talk about it with the CEO. The board chair is going to sit down with the CEO, or, the board chair is going to create a task force to look at this as an option and come back with some recommendations. There's a variety of ways you can go about doing this. That's the governance side of this. The other side is, and this happens a lot, is that a symptom of something else? Is that issue that was asked about a symptom of something else? Because I will get contacted very frequently about issue A, and issue A is not the issue. Issue A is the symptom of what the problem is. And so, fundraising is the classic one. So, I will get contact. Can you help my board learn how to fundraise? Well, I can do that. But then I'll ask, were they recruited and told they were supposed to do that? And if the answer is no, I say there's not much I can do for you, because that's not why you brought them here. Your issue is a recruitment or board expectation issue. That's not the issue. So the board does have a role to ensure that we're staying within the confines of our strategic plan. But Jenny, they can change the plan if they want to. But if this is a CEO that is holding the reins, that's a wholly different issue. That's a governance issue. That's a board that potentially, either doesn't understand the scope and authority of what it's responsible for, or is just frankly asleep. And I've seen all kinds of variations of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Are there any tactics, like, as far as, who should be approaching the executive director at that point? Is it the board chair? Is it, I mean, like, how do you navigate kind of,
Yeah.
getting a little bit into personnel type of, like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, that's a good question. My default position is the chair, right? The
Yeah,
chair, in these situations would represent the board. But listen, I- you know, I'm always about matching up the right people with the right people, because messaging and hearing what each other's saying is important. But, you know, there's other nuances. You opened up a whole Pandora's box here. There's nuances. Like, is the CEO a founder? Because if the CEO is a founder, that's a different level of ownership in what's going on than if they're not, right? And if they're
yeah,
the founder, who's the right person to talk to the founder? Different question, possibly, or a different answer, possibly. Then they're not the founder, right? As a rule, I'm board chair centric, but if that is an executive committee issue, it might be an executive committee issue. Because don't forget, the executive committee are the officers of the corporation. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to go down a legal, but they're the officers. So, in between board meetings, they certainly have some authority, but that would be kind of my port of call for that in that particular case.
that makes
So
total sense.
yeah,
I think it's a really common, friction, right, in that founder CEO world. Is definitely a unique one, right,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah,
Another question that I think comes up for a lot of nonprofits is, another one of our guests has, she's the board chair and is
yes,
struggling with accountability on her team. So directors that miss meetings take a
mm-hmm,
week to reply to emails,
mm-hmm,
and really, she wants to say you have to be in person to vote. As a board chair, does she have the authority to kind of make those rules? Like, you have to be in person to vote, and even to the point of, like, getting them off the board. She didn't suggest this, but I'm
right,
suggesting that, like, what does that look like if you just really have people that are checked out,
right.
of the board? How do you manage that as a board
Yeah.
chair?
So, and I like Jenny. I like the whole. I'm like, I don't have a problem if people are removed. I think we could be fast friends. That's a good philosophy. But here's the thing. So again, there's a couple issues here. Um, that is a symptom. That Here we go. This is a symptom. This is a symptom of something else. Those are the problems. Okay. So I like to look at this and say there's two parts to this. One is technical. Okay, it's a technical thing. We can make changes, and they're just technical changes. For example, you know, do you change your bylaws so that missing so many board meetings is an immediate resignation? I've seen that in people's bylaws. Now, you have to follow the rules to change your bylaws. The board chair can't just randomly change the bylaws. Everybody's bylaws have a section that says how they're changed. Um, the other thing is, um, I say that boards have, and by the way, so I said technical. The other part of this, it's adaptive, and why adaptive change, and many of you may be experts on adaptive change, is about behavior. It's easy to say we're moving the meeting or we're changing the number, but saying we're going to behave differently is different. That takes different kinds of people to react differently. But this is very technical, okay? 30 years of doing this. I'm going to tell you, we all have three kinds of board members, okay? One are the get-its. These are the stellar board members who I've labeled get-its for the obvious reason, because they get it. The other are fence riders, and that's a term that, we equate with, maybe they waffle a little bit. They might, do something one day and not another. And then, Jenny, in a very technical sense, the third are never going to get it. I mean, it took a 4-year college degree to get to this point, okay, to figure this out, all right? And I call them never going to get it because they're never going to get it. And what we do is we put all our energy into the never going to get it because we hope they'll change. And they don't. So the first thing I want to tell everybody is ignore the never going to get it. They're not going to be any different. So don't give them their energy. Work with some of the fence riders, right? How do we maximize the number of get it's that we can get? Now, back to the question, think about where people fit on the board you're involved in. Well, who do I have to work with, and what's the way to go about creating some of that adaptive change? So you could change your bylaws, as I mentioned, understand how you might go about doing that. The other thing is, do you have a governance committee? Have you created a committee that's one of its sole responsibilities is ensuring we're effective as a board? And governance committees can go as far as to say, should we have term limits? What happens with inactive board members, right? Who doesn't get another term? Who should we remove? That's a great strategy. And why I like that is because it isn't a singular board chair, pounding their fists on the table. And
Yeah.
as a board chair, I've been frustrated by things too. I get it. This is a long game. Like we say, governance is a journey. And,
Yeah.
like take a breath and decide, if I gave myself 6-8 months, how could I sort of slowly make this happen?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it sounds like this person maybe doesn't have a governance committee, Dave, but
Yeah.
also a governance committee could just be 2 or 3 people, right? Like this
Oh,
doesn't have to be
100%.
a big
No,
thing, but I do
no.
think there is, to your point, the governance committee diffuses the one-to-one conflict, right? It's like the committee's decided,
Right.
even if the committee's 2 or 3 people, there's some level of formality and diffusion that occurs in a positive way, I think
Yeah.
there. So
And here's the thing, your bylaws can be your best friend. So look at them.
yeah,
And if they say committees or task forces can be created on an as needed basis, then there's no big bylaw thing you have to do other than, as the chair, establish that task force or committee. Okay, now
yeah,
we're starting to get somewhere. That's a
yeah,
technical way to address what is really an adaptive issue, you
yeah.
know?
No, for sure.
Yeah.
Another
So.
question that came up was the what are your thoughts on a board chair or president withholding their votes unless there's a tie? Do you feel like is an appropriate approach?
Yeah, I know some boards that do that. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, you're entitled to a vote, I mean, so vote, but yeah, I've seen that. But a lot of people will, if that comes up, this is what they say to me, Jenny. Well, we purposely have an odd number of board members or whatever, so we don't run it that. Yeah, I think it's completely appropriate if that's the culture. Sometimes it's
Mhm.
written into the bylaws that the board chair has, this is, their scope within that, right? Like board chair shall not have vote or unless to, adjudicate a tie. Again, I'm not an attorney. I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so I'm not sure how to. But yeah, I mean, I see that. for sure.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, you're a board member, so you know you should feel like you can vote.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Do officers need to chair that governance committee? That going back to that, is that usually an officer chairing that?
Yeah, it is not. Now, let me clarify, Jenny. It could be, but it's not in Dave Sternberg's view, and here's why. Um, and I see this more often than not. People will say, "Yeah, we have a governance committee. It's our executive committee," and I'll say, "Well, here's the challenge with that. When you look at the scope of work of that committee, right? Defining what we're looking for in board members, deciding what the board members' role is, suggesting board members to be elected, holding accountability amongst board members, looking at board effectiveness, like all these things, then basically when the executive committee's doing it or officers, I think it says to everyone else, until you're an officer, you don't have any influence. And so from my world, yes, it's board members, but not officers, right? And sort of tongue in cheek, I often say that should be your smartest, most strategic board member. So the person who can say something like this, we're the governance committee suggesting a bylaw change. I want you to consider how you will vote for this based on what's best for the organization, not what you personally believe, because we're here to advance the work and mission of the organization, not our personal, belief system. Sometimes those match, sometimes they don't. But what leads that is what's best for the organization. And people will hear that person, right? And they'll vote accordingly, whatever that
Yeah.
is for them, but they'll vote accordingly, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
One thing that we talked a little bit about engagement of folks just not showing up and like
Hmm.
being disengaged in
Right.
that way. When we flip gears, I was at One Cause's conference last week in San Antonio, which is
Yep.
a lot of fundraisers, right? And
Yep.
so, when I talked to them, there was a lot of how does my board help with fundraising?
Hmm.
Those types of things. I have some perspectives and opinions. I'd love to hear kind of what you think, Dave, in regards to how should you look at if you are whether you're staff thinking about fundraising or whether you're the fundraising chair on the board, whatever kind of your role is, how do you think about engaging that board and what's the right way to go about that?
Yeah. That is a great, great question. Here's what I have found over the years. And I think it's been effective. I mean, the feedback I get from clients is it's effective, but here's a couple quick things. One is I find that board members enter the discussion around fundraising with a really lack of information. And the analogy I like to make is if we all were working in a for-profit company together, what we would want, we, the board, what we would want is the best amount of the most accurate set of information so we could make decisions for the company. And so I will actually quiz them about the state of philanthropy, how much, where it comes from, right, where it's going, the transference of wealth. And what they basically do is sit pretty stunned because they don't know how much is out there and how much could be going to charitable entities. And when they understand that, and when they see the trend for 60 years, they no longer can say as a group, well, there's too many charities, there's not enough money, and the economy's bad. Because when you look at all those factors, that's not really been an issue historically. It just hasn't. And so I've removed from their thinking what they think it looks like. But here's the most important thing. I like to teach them, and I will say, but you don't need to fundraise. And there'll be some chuckles, right? Like, well, really? Because we've been told that for years. And I'll say, well, what I'd like for you to do is understand the development process. And I'll talk about cultivation and solicitation stewardship. And I'm not trying to be coy. I'm not trying to mask this in a different way. I want everyone on the board to understand that there's a way to participate in development that results in more revenue being driven into the organization. Asking for money is only one of those things. So, what other things can you be doing, right? Bringing people closer, introducing them to others, right? Bringing them to see how the organization works, right? Introducing them to your CI. hosting an event in your home, calling donors and saying thank you. I got this list. It goes on and on. Okay. And those are cultivation and stewardship activities, because if you as a board member took 10 prospects, whether they're from the database or they're your own sphere of influence, and you spend a year doing nothing but cultivating and stewarding them and creating an increased interest in the organization, collectively, the board, that's going to translate to more revenue. And it's, again, not a short game, but it's not a long game either. It's kind of a medium game at that point.
Yeah.
And it's
And
easy
then
to
at
do.
that point, Dave, do you feel like if the board is doing those activities, then it's really like the development director and the development team within the organization, assuming it's a mid-sized organization
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
larger,
Right.
that really kind of, they kind of, I think of it from my marketing lens of like top of funnel, mid of funnel, like
Yeah.
that type of thing. They're really bringing it down at that point.
Yeah, they're supporting, right? Like, this is our external sales team, if you will. Now they're volunteers, right? The board
Right.
members they're
Yeah.
volunteers. How do we support them? Like, what do they need from us, the development team? So they're getting what they need. And yeah, we then, and the development side, play a more significant role about how do we help those prospects get even closer, so there's an opportunity for them to be solicited or make a gift or get involved in some way. 100%. But
Yeah.
Jenny,
And
here,
somebody suggested even renaming fundraising committee to development committee. Is that,
yeah,
yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I think
yeah,
words matter. I think that that's not a bad idea. So,
yeah.
if there's,
We've been through a million titles in resource development, like whatever works in your organization is what you should call it. Like, and if because the word fundraising makes people nervous, then just don't use it. Because to your point, Jenny,
yeah,
yeah, it kind of matters. I mean, but
yeah,
here's the other thing, and I have to add this, and that's that. Look, what I said sounded great. Yeah, we could do that. And by the way, if we had 15 board members and they all worked 10 individual prospects, that's like 150 new people
yeah,
that,
yeah,
okay. But here's the thing, there has to be accountability. You have to take time at board meetings to do kind of a round robin and hear what
yep,
people's experiences are. Because if I know I'm going to be held accountable, I'll do the work. And that brings us all the way back to where this whole thing started about
yeah,
creating accountability.
yeah. So getting like really brass tacks in the with the board members and I guess I can use the term fundraising in this setting, but like,
Yeah.
should they also, I mean, should the fundraising chair or the development director depend, should we
Hmm.
be looking at board members as like, how much are they giving? How much is our board going to like personally give? Or should that be like disassociated? Like, I think there is like give to get. There's some really
Yeah.
big boards here in Indianapolis, Dave, that
Yeah.
and are made up of big donors,
Hmm.
for sure. And so
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious your thoughts
Yeah.
there.
Well, I have some philosophies on that, so it's like a super good question. One is every board member should be a donor, and every board member should give a gift that is for them and their circumstances significant. In fact, the language I like to use is make a gift large enough you care how the organization spends it. Now, Jenny, that might be two different numbers for me and you. That might be 1 million for you and 500 for me. Okay, we'll take your pledge over a 12-month period, Jenny. And and so that's one, because you cannot do development work and encourage people to support an entity you're not supporting, right? Like, gee, it'd be great if you gave. I don't, but it'd be like, okay, there's no I give my time and therefore it's my money. That's a no-go. That's just not that. No, that's not going to work. Okay. And when organizations say those kinds of things, I say, well, you bring that board member your utility bill and have them call the electric company and tell them your time is going to pay for that bill, because this is not how this flies. Now, so number one is everyone gives. Number two is it's give and get. Give and, right? There's not an or. There shouldn't be an or. So if I can give 1,000 and raise 10,000, and you can give 10,000 and raise 500, those are equal. That's fine. We're doing the work. That's what we need to be doing collectively. Period. Um, and with respect to how much a board should give, I'm ambivalent. I mean, every situation is different. Like, I could
Totally.
argue to you a federally qualified health center, which has half of its board as consumers, I've seen where 100% of that side of the board gave, and the publicly elect the publicly elected side didn't. Like, how shameful is that? And those
Right.
folks, you're talking about quarters and dollars. Like, that's
Yeah.
super meaningful. So, this is about creating a culture where everyone understands their role and we're working together. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
There's certainly well-heeled people on some boards, no question.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah, yeah.
How do you kind of digging into this donor world a little bit? How do you overcome these historical donors who, maybe have helped start the organization, at least helped it keep going, and that they're dissatisfied with the current direction of the organization? Is that something like who does that fall on first off, and then like secondarily, how do you kind of manage through that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't see that a ton, but I mean, that's a stewardship issue. Like, at what point, if the CEO or executive director and board chair or anybody who was connected to that individual who's on the board sat and sort of strategized through that, what do we think the markers are that suggest to us an issue? Because there are some people that they just feel the way they feel, and they're not going to feel any different. I think we, as an organization, we owe it to the individual to continue to give them an opportunity of support or not. It's their choice. Jenny, I like the sit down opportunity where we say to people, listen, help me understand, or help us understand where we lost your trust, why you have chosen to make us a smaller priority than you have in the past. I just
Yeah.
think you're doing it from a position of help us understand where we may have done something wrong. I don't know if you've done
Yeah.
something wrong or not,
Yeah.
but
And
marching in and
maybe
saying, hey
they,
pal,
yeah, yeah. And maybe like I feel like that's also just one of those like clear as kind moments, right? Versus like kind of playing telephone and versus the sit down of like, let's just talk, because maybe there was another cause that came up, or maybe they,
right.
there's lots of things, right? That
Yeah.
could lead to those
Yeah,
things. Um,
illness in a
yeah,
family, there could
yeah,
be any number of things that have created that situation.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Um, just really simple but important question. And I think there's going to be a bit of it depends here. But how often should board meetings be held, and what's a good length of a meeting? So I'm curious what
Yeah.
you have to say.
I,
I can kind of share my experience, but
yeah,
yeah,
I'd love to hear yours. I do have a rule of thumb, although the answer is it depends. Okay.
yeah,
Here's my rule of thumb. Probably every other month is probably right on for most organizations. I think
yeah,
monthly's too much. Um, Quarterly could work. It sort of depends. Um, I do think there's not a length issue. I think what I find, Jenny, is that when we're evaluating board meetings, we we don't look at how we're running them, because what I hear is that attendance is bad for two reasons. You're meeting too much and the meetings are terrible. So I always say, do you run a meeting with like a consent agenda format and have some red meat? Have some topical thing each board meeting that we really can sink our teeth into and talk about as a body or in groups or whatever that looks like, because that'll keep people engaged. So that's kind of what I
yeah,
see. Yeah. Yeah. What
yeah.
do
No,
you think?
absolutely.
Where did I go
I
wrong?
No,
Yeah.
I think every other month is great. I feel like quarterly it starts to be really far. I
Right.
feel like monthly you start to be like, hey, didn't I just see you guys? Especially when there's like holidays and reschedules in there. All of a sudden
Right.
it really could be 3 weeks
Well,
ago we were meeting, and it doesn't feel, I think then you run the risk of maybe being too in the weeds with an organization.
mhm,
And I've been part of an executive committee before, and we would
yeah.
meet on those off months. And like I think there's
Yeah.
some things there. I love the idea of like the committees meeting 1 month, you're going to
Mhm,
kind of like say, hey, hopefully all our committees are going to meet in January. We're going to meet as a board February, and kind of do a rotation like that.
yeah.
That tends to also put a little bit more um, onus on making the committees active, right? Like instead of these like passive, I'm on the committee, it's like, oh no, we're going to meet 6 times a year as this committee. It might be a 20-minute Zoom conversation, right? It
Right.
doesn't have to be deep, right? And then I think it is still important for there to be some social aspects in these nonprofit boards, right? People join for lots of reasons that I think that it's easy to miss out on that, especially in sort of Zoom days, right? Like, but I think having some sort of social aspects is, that every other month allows you to have a couple of meetings that maybe are less meaty and a little bit more like, hey, we're going to have a brief meeting and then we're going to
Yeah.
have breakfast, dinner, lunch, whatever those things look like for you.
It's so you identified about 28 things right there, Jenny, and I want to applaud all the millennials and younger board members who've let us older people know that we've missed a few things. So here's a couple of things you pointed out, which are very, very important. One is affiliation matters. And by affiliation, I mean making sure everyone understands they belong with the group. Because when you belong with a group, you work harder, right? I don't want to let you down. You don't want to let me down. Those opportunities are important, right?
Yeah.
So think about what you're doing to create that. The other thing is, I had a colleague years ago that said something absolutely profound to me. And he said, board members are made between board meetings, not at them. And so if we don't have a structure and a culture that provides for the opportunity for board members to be active and succeed between meetings, we're not helping them, right? And this gets back to we're not practicing governance. And so I think, yes, you can meet every other month and you can talk about what do you do in the in-between, because some people that's a great time to do committee work. That's a great time to do other kind of work. I think that's like super important, because the engagement issue is usually centered around a bunch of different things, frequency kind of meetings, how's that? And I'm real big on flexibility of structure. So I can't tell you the number of bylaws I look at that have listed 40 committees. And well, if your bylaws say you have to have a committee for these things, you have to have a committee. I usually stream it down. I usually suggest streamlining it down to a few: executive, governance, finance, maybe there's an audit, right? And, select one or two, and the rest are as
marketing,
needed.
fundraising.
Right.
Some sort of, no, that makes sense. I do want to get to one final question and then a couple of wrap up notes. Although I feel like there's so many holes we could go down.
I thought we were going to 6, but go ahead.
We have until we have until 6. So what role should an ED have in the board meeting? Like, what is their role coming to a board meeting? Do they tell me that? Because I feel like I've been, we've talked earlier about sometimes the ED or CEO is like running the meeting, which probably isn't right, but what is their role?
Yeah. So here's, and they can, there's nothing wrong with the CEO having a real forceful role where they run the meeting. That's not a legal issue. Okay. If the board chair doesn't run the meeting, then you can leave people with the feeling that the board is not governing or in charge, and they are. So in Dave's opinion, in my opinion, right, the board member assists the CEO with setting the agenda. They certainly might, from an administrative standpoint, make sure that email goes out, right? It's on the portal that we use. Jenny, you've heard of such products, and everything's updated. And so I, as a board member, can prepare in advance. I think the board chair runs the meeting. I think if we have an environment where the CEO or ED offers a report, they offer a report. They certainly are experts when needed, right? When questions are asked and clarifications are necessary. That would be generally what I see. It's not uncommon for me to see the CEO or the board or the executive director run the meeting. That's
okay. So you think that is an okay thing? It's just a matter of making sure the board at the same time still knows their role and their responsibility.
I'll stop short of saying it's okay. I'll just say it's not uncommon. I don't know that I think it's okay, but within an organization, there might be bigger fish to fry than that. I mean, it's, right. I mean, again, the board cares and feeds for itself. So as long as we're interfering with that, they're not doing it.
Right. No, for sure. And I mean, Dave nicely did bring up the idea of a portal or of a place, but I do think having a consistent place, a consistent, agenda, all of those types of things adds to that structure, right? And a place to have your bylaws, a place where there's not the scramble, like that is something that at the sort of the, if there was a Maslow's hierarchy of like what you get out of a board portal, that's kind of like step 1, right? You've got like food and drink because you're able to just have everything there, and you're able to not kind of have this scramble. So,
Well, and Jenny,
yeah,
I mean, I come from the era of we walked to board meetings uphill both ways in the snow. But here's the thing.
yeah,
I go back to the early days of Boardable, early Jeb Banner days. Okay. And here's the thing. I'll throw this out there because, make sure if you have the product, you train everyone how to use it, get the support.
yeah,
And because if it's not being used or we don't know how
used
to use it,
totally.
it's not as helpful as it could be. So,
Totally.
yeah.
I'm going to cram in 2 quick questions that I think we can cover in 4
Okay.
minutes.
All right.
I might flip to a couple of slides for everyone, but do know that this is recorded. There's some resources that we'll make sure that we share that Dave's pointed out, and then we'll also be able to do that. But we do want to make this office hours, and I feel like, when I was on a college campus, if I showed up with 5 minutes left, I'd still want to get an answer from the professor. So, one quick thing is, do you think there could be a non-board committee on the governance committee, or a non-board member on the governance committee, or should it be a board member? And then secondarily, should any committee have a non-board member? And I love the idea of a committee member as sort of, I don't even want to say a tryout, but sort of, right, like a fundraising committee member's great as a future board member, right? Like
Yeah.
that to me is like a no-brainer. Curious your thoughts on the governance committee having a
So
non-board.
I totally concur with non-board members serving on committees. This is a great farm
Yeah,
system, as the old baseball coach says. The I can see value in soliciting the feedback and maybe input of a non-board member for governance purposes. The challenge gets to be there's times when there really are looking at effectiveness and things that really have to be debated, and probably in a way that you probably don't necessarily need an external person who's not on the board to be involved. But
yeah.
I wouldn't say no, I'd just say carefully.
Yeah, no, that's
Okay.
totally fair.
Yeah.
And then one question that Lorelai brought up is, what about engaging an advisory council?
Oh yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
I feel like this is also sometimes a way, like, that the big donors that maybe don't really have the capacity to be on a true board of directors, like that advisory council can be a nice way to manage that situation. I'm kind of curious your thoughts on an advisory
Yes. I have thoughts. I'm going to share them with you.
council. Okay.
I hate the term advisory because I don't think anyone's looking for advice. So that's issue one. So I use terms like senior governance or senior leadership council or senior leadership team. I love them. They have to be cared for. There has to be a charter that describes their purpose. They should be engaged periodically. It's not a pasture. Okay. So I love them because they can be a great add-on. It's also a great way for past board members to potentially continue some of that, institutional memory and history. Yeah, no, I love them. I just don't like the word advisory, and I think we as a sector do just a bad job with them because we don't want to give them the time and energy that really would be worth it. But I will close with this, Jenny. When I work with a client and they say, "Well, Jenny's on the board and she's our biggest donor and she gets to call the shots, but she never shows up to anything," like, what do we do? And I say, "Well, Jenny's your biggest donor and she never shows up to any board meetings. You know what I call Jenny?" And they say, "What?" And I say, "She's a donor." Like
Yeah.
that's not right. So create
Yeah.
the right kind of culture because that's what's going to be of greatest value in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say that some people can do both really well, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think there's some,
Yeah.
people that have great business experience, great nonprofit experience,
Yeah.
also donors, but I do
Right.
think that, so I don't think you should disclude donors from being board
Oh, no,
members, but
not
I
at
think,
all.
yeah,
No,
like
not at all. I
yeah,
just,
there's,
when we
yeah,
feel beholden to the one, that's a
yes, yeah,
problem. Yeah.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Young professional boards, do you like the concept
I
of a young
do. I
professional
I,
board?
I
Yeah.
kind of do. Although I was defensive of young professionals because I felt like it was like looking down on them. Like these are not
Yeah, yeah,
young
like just
professionals;
making
these are
sure.
professionals.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they can work really effectively if they fit your culture. Otherwise, listen, if these people are good, put them on your board.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I know Habitat here in Indy does a good job of a young professionals board that's super active, and their
Yeah,
programming reflects, a lot of that. And so I've seen it work well,
yeah,
in that setting. And they have a long history, like people want to be on the young professionals board, type of thing. I
right.
think that's
Yeah,
that sometimes it is just like maybe not even history, but it's like, to your point, the culture that's been created. It's like a board you want to be on. It's, it's fun, but it's also meaningful. Like, so yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the best run boards have a really good recruitment process, a waiting list, if you will,
Yeah.
and a reputation in the community of like, I want to be on that board. Like,
Yeah. No.
that's a win for an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dave, I feel like there was a million different topics we could have went down. So I really appreciate the folks that joined us for kind of guiding our conversation and allowing us to take your questions and kind of take them in a few different directions. Again, we could probably go for 2 more hours. In my head, I'm already thinking of I'm like, ooh, what do we think about this situation, or Dave, what would you do here? And those are all kind of great things for a future session or future sessions that we have.
Yeah,
here
it'd be
at
great.
Boardable.
Yeah.
So awesome. Thanks so much for
Okay.
joining us, Dave. And thanks, folks. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll get you all the recorded information. But this was a fun way to kind of spend an hour of my afternoon, and hope everybody has a good rest of your week. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.